Welcome to the English Story Room. Today, we share the story of a man who touched the world with kindness and courage. Pope Francis. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina, he became the first Latin American pope in 2013. His religious life began as a Jesuit priest, living simply and serving the poor. He rose to lead the Catholic Church, guiding 1.3 billion people with humility. Pope Francis built bridges with other faiths, meeting Muslim, Jewish, and Buddhist leaders to promote peace. He stood firmly against war, calling it a failure that destroys lives. In Gaza, he prayed daily for suffering children, urging peace for all. His life was a journey of faith, service, and love for humanity. Join us to learn about his remarkable path and improve your English. Pope Francis, whose birth name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was born on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He grew up in a simple home in the Flores neighborhood, surrounded by love and hardship. His parents, Mario Jose Bergoglio and Regina Maria Sivori, were Italian immigrants. They had escaped Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy, hoping for a better life in Argentina. Jorge was the eldest of 5 children. His father worked as an accountant, and his mother was a homemaker. The family lived modestly in a working-class neighborhood where many people struggled to survive. Life wasn't easy, but it was full of community, faith, and warmth. As a child, Jorge loved playing soccer in the streets with his friends. He also enjoyed tango music and watching billiards games at local cafes. Despite the challenges around him, his childhood was rich with small joys and strong values. From a young age, Jorge showed signs of deep thought and kindness. He studied chemistry in secondary school and took on several small jobs. He worked as a bouncer and janitor to help support his family and later found work as a food scientist. But the world around him was changing. Argentina was going through political chaos. Jorge witnessed the rise and fall of powerful leaders like Juan Perón. In 1955, a military coup shook the nation. Fear and uncertainty grew across the country, especially among the poor. These experiences shaped Jorge's view of the world. He began to see the pain of others and felt a strong pull toward a life of meaning and service. He didn't know it yet, but his journey had already begun, a journey that would one day take him from the dusty streets of Buenos Aires to the heart of the Vatican. The political unrest in Argentina continued to grow, but Jorge Mario Bergoglio was changing in a different way. As a young man, he had already faced many challenges, working odd jobs, witnessing poverty, and living through fear under political pressure. But it was during this time, in the quiet corners of his heart, that something deeper began to stir. At the age of 19, Jorge went to church for confession. It was a simple moment, just a young man speaking with a priest. But that conversation touched something inside him. A seed was planted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a whisper, a call toward a different life. Jorge had once liked a girl and even thought about getting married. But his heart was slowly turning toward God. A near-death experience from pneumonia at the age of 21 made him reflect even more deeply. Doctors had to remove part of his right lung to save his life. That experience left him physically weaker, but spiritually stronger. In 1960, Jorge joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. It was not just a religious group, it was a path of discipline, simplicity, and global service. Jesuits take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They dedicate their lives to education, truth, and helping the forgotten. Jorge felt at home among them. He studied hard and earned a master's degree in philosophy. He later taught literature and psychology at high schools, where his students remembered him as gentle but firm. Education was not just a job for him, it was a way to shape minds and hearts. He didn't stop learning. He studied English in Dublin and theology in Frankfurt, where he was influenced by the famous theologian Romano Guardini. In 1969, he was ordained a Jesuit priest. He later became the rector of a theological and philosophical faculty in Buenos Aires. But these were dangerous times. From 1974 to 1983, Argentina fell into what is now known as the Dirty War. A brutal dictatorship led by Jorge Videla ruled with fear and violence. Thousands disappeared, students, activists, even priests. Jorge Bergoglio, now a Jesuit leader, was accused by some of being too silent during the regime. Others say he worked in secret, helping people escape. One story tells of him giving his own identity papers to save a man's life. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. These years tested his faith, his courage, and his understanding of leadership. From the streets of Flores to the classrooms of Buenos Aires, from quiet prayers to dangerous decisions, Jorge's journey as a Jesuit shaped the man he would become. He had walked through fear, faced death, and chosen faith. But his path was far from over. The memory of Argentina's dirty war never left Father Jorge Bergoglio. He carried the scars of those years, not on his skin, but in his soul. As a Jesuit, he had learned to serve quietly, to lead humbly, and to walk with people through their pain. In 1997, his journey took a new turn. He was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Now, he wasn't just a teacher or priest. He was a shepherd of millions in one of South America's busiest cities. But Jorge didn't let the title change him. He refused to live in the Grand Archbishop's palace. Instead, he moved into a small apartment, cooked his own meals, and used public transportation like everyone else. People began to call him the slum bishop. He spent his time in the shanty towns, the villas miserias, where the poorest lived. He didn't just visit once a year. He went regularly, listening to their stories, eating with them, praying with them. He doubled the number of priests working in those forgotten places, believing that every person deserved dignity. On Holy Thursdays, while other bishops washed the feet of rich donors or church officials, Archbishop Bergoglio washed the feet of prisoners, elderly hospital patients, and the sick. His message was simple: no one is below God's love. But even as he served the people, the past still followed him. As president of the Argentine Episcopal Conference, Jorge publicly apologized for the Catholic Church's silence during the Dirty War. It was not easy. The wounds were still fresh, and many still doubted the Church. But Jorge believed healing could only begin with truth. In 2001, Pope John Paul II made him a cardinal. The red robes did not impress him. To Jorge, the color only reminded him of the blood of martyrs and the duty to serve the suffering. Even as a cardinal, he remained the same humble man. When he flew to Rome, he carried his own bags. He avoided luxury hotels and preferred to stay quietly with priests or in simple guest houses. He became a voice in the Vatican for the poor and forgotten. He challenged priests who lived in comfort while their people struggled. Once, he sold the shares of the Archdiocese's bank just to push for financial reform. To him, the church had to be clean, honest, and focused on service. In 2005, after Pope John Paul II's death, Jorge attended the conclave to elect the next pope. Many believed he could be chosen. He was a papabile, a potential pope. But Jorge quietly supported Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. For Cardinal Bergoglio, power was never the goal. Service was. He returned to Buenos Aires and continued walking the dusty streets of the slums, praying in silence and serving without headlines. But God was preparing him for something even greater. The world was watching, and soon it would call his name again. The year was 2013. The world was shocked when Pope Benedict XVI resigned. It was the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years. The Vatican was quiet, filled with questions. Cardinals from across the globe flew in for a conclave. Among them was Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the humble man from Argentina who had once walked the slums and taken the bus. But this time, something was different. Inside the Sistine Chapel, as the ballots were cast and the prayers whispered, the cardinal searched not just for a leader, but for a shepherd, someone who could rebuild trust, heal wounds, and lead with compassion. On March 13, 2013, white smoke rose over the Vatican. The crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square held their breath. A cardinal stepped out and spoke, "Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam." I announce to you a great joy. We have a pope. The name shocked many. Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He was the first Jesuit pope, the first pope from the Americas, the first non-European pope in over 1,000 years. And then he did something no one expected. He chose the name Francis, after St Francis of Assisi, the man who gave up wealth to live among the poor. It was not just a name. It was a message. From the moment he stepped onto the balcony, Pope Francis broke traditions. He wore simple white robes without the golden cape. He asked the people to pray for him first before he blessed them. His voice was gentle, his eyes humble, and the world began to listen. From day one, he made it clear, I want a church that is poor and for the poor. He refused to live in the grand papal palace. Instead, he stayed in a modest guest house. He ate in the cafeteria, carried his own bag, and even paid his own hotel bill. But Pope Francis wasn't just humble, he was bold. He called for mercy over judgment. He opened doors for those who felt excluded from the church, divorced people, the LGBTQ+ community, struggling families. He didn't change doctrine overnight, but he changed the tone. The church was no longer a courtroom, it was a hospital. He focused on global crises, refugees, climate change, economic injustice. In 2015, he released a powerful letter called Laudato Si, urging the world to protect the earth and care for creation. He visited war zones, slums, and prisons. In 2014, he kissed the disfigured face of a man with a rare disease, showing the world what compassion looked like. He reformed the Vatican's finances, challenged corruption, and brought new transparency to the church. Some praised him, others criticized him, but Francis kept going with a smile. His papacy was not perfect, but it was human. And in a time of division and fear, he became a symbol of hope. From a young boy in Buenos Aires, to a quiet Jesuit priest, to the archbishop walking through slums. Now, the Pope who knelt before the world with open arms, this was not just leadership, this was servant leadership. And Pope Francis had only just begun. When Pope Francis chose the name Francis, the world quickly realized it was not just a name, it was a mission. Inspired by St Francis of Assisi, who gave up everything to live with the poor, Pope Francis carried this message into every part of his papacy. From his first words as Pope, he said clearly, "I want a church that is poor and for the poor." And he lived it. Unlike many world leaders surrounded by power and comfort, Pope Francis walked a different path. He didn't live in luxury. He chose a small apartment in the Vatican guest house. He refused a golden throne, wore simple shoes, and carried his own suitcase. But it wasn't about humility for show. It was about solidarity. He believed that real leadership meant being close to the people, especially the ones most forgotten. Everywhere he went, Francis sought out the poor, not just with words, but with action. In Rome, he opened free showers and barber services for the homeless near the Vatican. He sent doctors into the streets to provide medical care for the poor. On cold nights, his team gave out blankets and sleeping bags, with no cameras, no press. He knew poverty wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. He hugged the homeless, he ate with them, he knelt and washed the feet of prisoners, migrants, and AIDS patients. People who had been rejected by society. Francis called them his brothers and sisters. He once said, "The poor are not a problem. They are a resource from which to draw as we strive to live more human lives." On his travels, he made it a priority to visit slums and refugee camps. In Brazil, he walked through the favelas and told the youth, "You are not alone. The church walks with you." In the Philippines, after a typhoon destroyed lives, he cried with the victims and gave them strength. In Africa, he listened to children speak of war, hunger, and fear, and gave them a message of peace and hope. He didn't just serve the poor, he amplified their voices. He challenged world leaders to look beyond their borders. He spoke against economic injustice, excessive greed, and systems that create poverty. He warned that in a world where money is God, the poor become invisible, and he refused to let that happen. Even in his homilies, he kept things simple, not high theology, but messages anyone could understand. Love, mercy, justice. Because to Pope Francis, theology wasn't just about books. It was about how we treat the least among us. He once shared a painful truth. When a homeless person dies of cold on the street, it is not news. But when the stock market loses 2 points, it is a tragedy. He didn't just lead the church, he challenged the world. And while some disagreed with him, many more were inspired, especially young people who saw in him a rare kind of leader, a leader who listens, a leader who lifts, a leader who loves without conditions. From the dusty streets of Buenos Aires to the great halls of the Vatican, his heart never changed. The Pope was not above the people. He was among them. And in a world that often forgets the poor, Pope Francis made sure they were seen, heard, and embraced. Pope Francis didn't just serve the poor. He also spoke up for the forgotten voices of war. In the same way he walked with the poor, he also walked with those suffering from the horrors of conflict. As the world witnessed endless wars from the streets of Gaza to the battlefields of Ukraine, Pope Francis made it his mission to be a voice of peace. He didn't just condemn war. He called it a failure of politics, a tragedy that destroyed lives. For Pope Francis, war was not just a political issue, but a human issue. It meant real people, mothers, fathers, children, losing their lives, their futures. From the very beginning of his papacy, He made his anti-war stance clear. War is a failure of politics. War always brings destruction, death, and pain. When conflict erupted in Ukraine, he didn't stay silent. Pope Francis became a champion of peace, praying for both sides, urging world leaders to choose diplomacy over destruction. He condemned the violence, calling for an end to the bloodshed, and asked everyone to negotiate, not fight. But his words weren't just words, they were backed by actions. In 2014, he visited military cemeteries and mourned the deaths of young soldiers. He honored them as victims of a system that failed to protect their lives and futures. For him, every war was a tragedy of youth lost too soon. And it wasn't just Ukraine. His voice echoed in the Gaza Strip, where thousands of families were caught in an endless cycle of violence. Pope Francis prayed daily for the innocent children who were forced to live through horrors no child should ever see. He called the situation an injustice, urging for peace, dialogue, and the cessation of violence. His visit to the Middle East was a bold one. Pope Francis traveled to Jordan, Palestine, and Israel with one message: peace. In Gaza, he met with families affected by the violence. He knelt in prayer, asking God to bring peace to a region torn apart by conflict. His call for peace wasn't just a plea, it was a demand for humanity to choose love over hate, unity over division. His commitment to peace went beyond words. He made sure to visit the most dangerous and unstable places to bring hope. Whether it was Iraq, where he visited Shia and Sunni communities, or Palestine and Israel, where he brokered meetings with both sides, Pope Francis remained a tireless advocate for peace. One of the most defining moments of his papacy was when he spoke about the global climate crisis. A crisis he also saw as part of the broader picture of global violence. He warned that the earth was being destroyed by greed and that the poorest, those who had done the least to harm the planet, would suffer the most. Pope Francis didn't just see climate change as an environmental issue, it was a social and peace issue. He called on everyone to care for Mother Earth and to recognize that the Earth's wounds were also the wounds of the poor. He linked the fight against climate change to his message of peace, because a planet at war with itself would never be peaceful. But even though Pope Francis fought tirelessly for peace, his critics were never far behind. Some saw his words as too radical. Others questioned his refusal to endorse war in certain cases. However, Pope Francis never wavered. For him, peace wasn't an option. It was a duty. In his heart, he carried the knowledge that peace is the only true path to a world where everyone, especially the poor, the sick, and the marginalized, can live in dignity. And so, Pope Francis spoke for the voiceless. He wept for the suffering, and he called for peace, not just as an idea, but as a necessity for humanity's survival. He will be remembered as the Pope who stood against war, the Pope who asked the world to lay down its weapons and choose a path of dialogue, mercy, and love. Pope Francis understood that true peace could not exist unless people of all faiths stood together in unity. After all, war and violence are often born from misunderstandings between cultures, religions, and beliefs. And so, from the moment he became Pope, Francis set out to build bridges between religions, bringing people together to work for peace. His mission wasn't just about healing divisions within the Catholic Church. It was about healing divisions between religions. Pope Francis knew that the path to peace wasn't one that could be walked alone. It had to be a global effort. supported by all faiths, all communities, and all people. One of the most significant moments of his papacy came in 2013, when he met with Imam Ahmad Tayyib, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, one of the most influential religious figures in Islam. Together, they signed the Abu Dhabi Declaration, a historic document calling for peace, tolerance, and interfaith cooperation. It was the first time that a pope and an imam publicly agreed on a shared vision of peace. Pope Francis's commitment to interfaith dialogue wasn't just a political gesture, it was a personal calling. He often said that true peace can only come when we understand and respect each other. His belief in human fraternity led him to meet and build relationships with religious leaders from around the world. In 2016, he visited the United Arab Emirates and prayed in the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi, where he stood alongside the Imam and emphasized the importance of mutual respect between religions. For Pope Francis, these were not just symbolic acts. They were a deep expression of his belief that all religions, regardless of their differences, shared the same call to love, peace, and service to humanity. But Pope Francis's interfaith efforts didn't stop there. He reached out to Jewish, Buddhist, and Hindu communities, establishing friendships that transcended religious differences. In his travels, he visited synagogues and mosques, offering words of peace and unity. He even fasted during Ramadan to show solidarity with the Muslim community. For Pope Francis, it wasn't enough to talk about peace. He believed in showing true solidarity through action. One of his most powerful messages came during a visit to the Colosseum in Rome, where he hosted a peace event that included people from Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and other faith traditions. He said, "Never again against one another," calling for people of all religions to reject violence and choose dialogue instead. It was a bold statement, urging the world to break free from cycles of hatred and conflict. He also met with the Dalai Lama, a Buddhist leader, and spoke about the importance of respecting human dignity and rejecting violence. For Pope Francis, peace wasn't a distant ideal. It was a living, breathing effort that required collaboration between all faiths, all people, all nations. But despite these powerful gestures of peace, Pope Francis didn't shy away from confronting challenges in interfaith dialogue. He often spoke out against religious extremism, which twisted the teachings of faith to justify violence. He urged leaders and followers to return to the core principles of love, compassion, and understanding, calling these values the true essence of every faith. Pope Francis understood that the journey toward peace was far from easy, but he also knew that it was a journey worth taking. Every step, every conversation, every meeting with leaders of different faiths was an opportunity to break down the walls that separated people and replace them with bridges of understanding. In his final years, Pope Francis continued to stress the importance of interfaith dialogue. He knew that no matter how different we may appear, at the heart of it all, we share the same human experience, the same desire for peace, love, and dignity. And so, Pope Francis remained a tireless advocate for interfaith unity. His legacy is not just one of advocating for peace in the world, it's a legacy of bringing the world's religions together, showing that faith and love can unite us, even in the most challenging times. As Pope Francis continued his journey of peace and unity, he realized that the Church itself had to undergo significant changes. It wasn't enough to talk about love, humility, and peace. He knew that the church needed to live these values every single day. It had to become a place of healing, transparency, and service to the world's most vulnerable. But the path to reform was not an easy one, and Pope Francis would face some of the most challenging controversies of his papacy. One of the first and most urgent challenges Pope Francis faced was the Church's response to the child abuse scandals. These scandals had deeply shaken the faith of many and left the Church with a broken trust. Pope Francis knew that he couldn't ignore this issue. It was too important. He was deeply pained by the suffering of the victims and felt a moral responsibility to address the Church's failure to protect them. In 2018, Pope Francis took a bold step by summoning a global summit with bishops to address the sexual abuse crisis. During this summit, he publicly apologized to the survivors, acknowledging the Church's failures in handling abuse cases. He also introduced new measures, including the creation of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. This commission was tasked with investigating abuse cases and ensuring that the Church took responsibility for its mistakes. Despite these efforts, many critics felt the Church wasn't doing enough to bring justice to the victims. But Pope Francis remained steadfast in his resolve to cleanse the Church of corruption and ensure that such abuses never happened again. He removed bishops who were accused of covering up abuse, including several in Chile, and worked to establish stricter guidelines for handling allegations. The Pope's commitment to reform extended beyond sexual abuse issues. He also tackled the Vatican's financial corruption, which had long been a source of concern. The Vatican Bank, notorious for its secretive dealings, had been involved in numerous scandals over the years. Pope Francis took drastic action to shut down corrupt accounts and implement measures to prevent money laundering. He also canceled lavish bonuses for Vatican employees, opting to use those funds for charitable causes. Another major area of reform for Pope Francis was the role of women in the Church. For centuries, the Catholic Church had limited women's involvement in decision-making roles. Pope Francis, however, made significant strides in changing that. He appointed women to high-ranking positions within the Roman Curia, the governing body of the Church. Though he didn't endorse women priests, Pope Francis praised women as custodians of life and emphasized that the Church needed to listen to their voices. However, Pope Francis faced backlash from some conservative factions within the Church. Many felt that his reforms were too liberal and strayed from traditional teachings. He was even accused of being a heretic for his progressive stances on social issues like divorce, LGBTQ rights, and abortion. Despite these criticisms, Pope Francis refused to back down. He believed that the Church's mission was to reach out to those on the margins of society, offering them compassion and understanding instead of condemnation. One of the Pope's most controversial decisions was his statement on homosexuality, where he famously said, "Who am I to judge?" His remarks were widely seen as a step forward for LGBTQ inclusion, but they also sparked debate among those who held traditional views on marriage and sexuality. Pope Francis allowed blessings for same-sex individuals, though he stressed that the Church couldn't endorse same-sex unions. These nuanced positions made Pope Francis a polarizing figure, beloved by many for his compassion, yet criticized by others for not adhering strictly to Church doctrine. Pope Francis' focus on the global South also caused tension within the Church. By appointing cardinals from Latin America, Asia, and Africa, he shifted the center of the Church's power away from Europe, where it had traditionally been centered. This move angered some European conservatives, but it was a reflection of Pope Francis' vision for a more inclusive church that truly represented the global community. Amidst all these reforms, Pope Francis faced challenges from within and outside the church. His health was beginning to decline, and he had to contend with ongoing controversies surrounding the church's position on issues like contraception, gender roles, and the ordination of women. But through it all, Pope Francis remained committed to the mission of reform, to make the church a place where all people, especially the poor and marginalized, could find love, hope, and dignity. The Pope's efforts weren't about changing the core teachings of the Catholic Church. Instead, they were about changing how the Church engaged with the world, calling for a more inclusive, transparent, and compassionate approach. He was reshaping the Church for a new era, one that would be able to meet the challenges of the modern world. As Pope Francis continued to champion reforms, he also took steps to bring about global dialogue. In his calls for social justice, climate action, and equality, he brought the Church into a broader conversation about the challenges facing the global community. He knew that these conversations, though uncomfortable at times, were essential for the future of the Church and the world. Pope Francis' reform efforts may not have been fully realized in his lifetime, but they sparked an important conversation within the Church about its role in the modern world. His legacy will be one of a pope who challenged the status quo, broke through barriers, and invited people of all walks of life to come to the table, ensuring that the Church would be a place of healing, justice, and love for generations to come. After years of leading the Catholic Church with unwavering determination and compassion, Pope Francis found himself facing a challenge that no amount of willpower could overcome: his declining health. As the years passed, his once strong body began to show the effects of aging, and his physical ailments became more difficult to manage. Despite this, Pope Francis remained committed to his mission and continued to serve as the spiritual leader of millions around the world, even as he battled various health issues. It began in 2014, shortly after his papacy started, when Pope Francis first began to experience significant discomfort due to knee pain. Initially, it was a small issue that he could push through, but as time went on, the pain worsened, and he was eventually diagnosed with osteoarthritis. This condition, which affects the joints, made it increasingly difficult for him to walk or stand for long periods, and soon he had to rely on a wheelchair for mobility during certain events. Despite this, Pope Francis refused to let his condition stop him. His passion for serving others, for promoting peace, and for fighting injustice never wavered. In fact, he often used his physical challenges as a way to show solidarity with those who were suffering in the world. He would often speak about how his own health struggles allowed him to better empathize with the poor and the sick, who too often felt invisible in society. But his health issues didn't end there. In 2021, Pope Francis underwent major surgery to remove part of his colon due to diverticulitis, a condition that causes painful inflammation of the intestines. The surgery was a success, but it marked a turning point in the Pope's health. He had to spend several days in the hospital recovering, and during this time, many people began to wonder how much longer Pope Francis could continue his duties at the helm of the Church. The surgery left the Pope with a weakened immune system, and he became more vulnerable to illness, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic continued to impact the world. Pope Francis, who had previously been so energetic and full of life, now found himself needing more rest and relying on his team of doctors to ensure his health remained stable. As the years passed, it became clear that the Pope was slowing down. Though he was still able to carry out many of his duties, the physical demands of his role were becoming increasingly difficult. Pope Francis had always believed in the importance of serving others, but he also understood that sometimes service meant knowing when to rest. His health struggles were a reminder to him and to the world that even the most dedicated leaders are human. In 2023, after years of health struggles, Pope Francis made a significant decision. In a rare move for a pope, he announced that he was considering resigning from his papacy due to his declining health. He spoke openly about the physical limitations he was facing and how he didn't want to continue in a role that required so much energy and dedication when he was no longer able to give it his all. This announcement was met with shock and sadness, as Pope Francis had served as a beacon of hope and love for so many. However, Pope Francis's health continued to deteriorate, and it became clear that his final days were approaching. Despite this, he remained committed to his mission of spreading peace, love, and understanding, even if he could no longer physically lead as he once had. He continued to meet with world leaders, visit hospitals, and deliver powerful messages of compassion even from his hospital bed. He never once showed signs of bitterness or frustration, only a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had lived and the people he had met along the way. As his health continued to decline, Pope Francis made one final decision. He would focus on passing on the torch of leadership to the next generation. He knew that the Church was in good hands, and it was time for him to step back. He spoke to his cardinals and bishops, urging them to continue his work of reforming the Church and spreading the message of hope and mercy. He was ready to rest, knowing that the work he had started would live on. On April 4th, 2025, Pope Francis passed away peacefully in his sleep. His death marked the end of an era for the Catholic Church, but his legacy lived on. The Church he left behind was stronger, more compassionate, and more inclusive because of the reforms he had championed during his papacy. In the final hours of his life, Pope Francis reflected on his journey and the decisions he had made. He was at peace, knowing that he had lived a life true to his faith, committed to serving the poor, promoting interfaith unity, and advocating for justice. He had faced numerous challenges, health issues, controversies, and even personal doubts, but he had always remained faithful to his calling. Pope Francis's final days were not just a time of personal reflection, but also a testament to his legacy. He had changed the Catholic Church forever, transforming it into a more compassionate, inclusive, and transparent institution. His health struggles were a reminder that even the greatest leaders are human, but his enduring faith, wisdom, and love for humanity would never be forgotten. On April 21st, 2025, the world lost a spiritual leader who had reshaped the Catholic Church and inspired millions worldwide. Pope Francis, the first pope from Latin America, passed away after a life of deep faith dedication to the poor, and tireless efforts for interfaith dialogue. His legacy was immense, and his impact on the world continued even after his death. Pope Francis's papacy had always been about more than just leading the Catholic Church. It was about making the Church a force for good in the world. He had spent his life focusing on the most vulnerable, advocating for the poor, the marginalized, and those forgotten by society. His leadership emphasized the importance of service, kindness, and compassion, values he carried into everything he did. From the moment he became pope, his focus was clear: service over power and love over judgment. He worked tirelessly to reform the Church, making it more transparent, inclusive, and committed to the poor. His efforts to address social justice issues, from poverty alleviation to climate change, set a new standard for what it meant to be a modern leader of faith. Pope Francis also worked towards reconciliation among different religions. He believed that peace came not from division, but from unity and understanding. He reached out to people of all faiths, advocating for interfaith dialogue and making efforts to bridge gaps between religions. His meeting with Muslim, Jewish, and Christian leaders was symbolic of his deep commitment to a peaceful, united world. The Pope's reforms within the Catholic Church were profound. He emphasized the importance of a church that served rather than one that ruled, focusing on mercy, inclusion, and justice. His decisions to include more women in decision-making processes and his calls for greater transparency in the Vatican reshaped how the Church operated and engaged with the world. As Pope Francis's health began to decline, he reflected on his legacy and the work that still needed to be done. He had always said that his role was not to be remembered for titles, but for the lives he touched and the changes he brought about. And in his final days, it was clear that he had made a difference. Though his death marked the end of an era, Pope Francis' influence continued through the many lives he had touched. He had shown the world what it meant to lead with humility, to serve with a heart of compassion, and to prioritize the care of others. His legacy was not built on monuments or material success, but on the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed his acts of kindness and compassion. His message, however, was clear: service never ends. Pope Francis' teachings would live on through the people he had inspired. His legacy wasn't just about his papacy, it was about the continued work of love, justice, and peace that would carry on long after his passing. The Catholic Church would continue to evolve and adapt, and Pope Francis's influence would be felt in the reforms he set in motion, the leaders he inspired, and the communities he had touched. His final message was a call to action, that all people, regardless of faith or background, should strive for a world built on compassion, justice, and mercy. Though Pope Francis was no longer with us, his teachings and his legacy was still very much alive. And for those who had walked in his footsteps, the work was far from over. The challenges of the world would continue, but Pope Francis had shown everyone that faith, hope, and love were the tools needed to build a more just and peaceful world. As we reflect on the extraordinary life of Pope Francis, we are reminded that true leadership is not defined by power, but by service, humility, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. From his humble beginnings in Buenos Aires to becoming the first Jesuit pope, his journey has touched the hearts of millions. Pope Francis' dedication to the poor, marginalized, and excluded was more than just words. It was a mission that shaped every decision he made. His advocacy for interfaith dialogue, climate justice, and peace has inspired not only Catholics, but people of all faiths to work together for a better world. Though he has now passed, his legacy lives on. Through the reforms he set in motion, the communities he uplifted, and the love he spread to every corner of the globe, his vision for a world rooted in compassion, mercy, and understanding will continue to guide us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Pope Francis. May his example inspire us all to live with humility, to serve others, and to work for a more just and peaceful world. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about influential figures who have changed the world. Stay tuned for more stories that connect faith, humanity, and the power of compassion. Until next time, take care and keep spreading kindness wherever you go.